Today we're joined by Dawn. Dawn, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
I'm Dawn Robinette, APR, accredited in public relations, and I own Tail to Tail Communications. We're a boutique agency in San Antonio. We work with local, regional, and national clients, both on public relations and on content creation.
You mentioned APR. Can you tell us just a little bit about that too?
I wish more people understood that and didn't think it was annual percentage rate, but accredited in public relations. That is a designation awarded by the Public Relations Society of America. You have to sit for a not fun exam, I'll go ahead and put it that way, to really prove your breadth and depth of knowledge in the profession. And so there are roughly 5,000 accredited professionals across the country. I think I've got that number correct.
And I know that you also have a lot of experience looking at public relations plans as a part of your role in PRSA. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So I am a past president of the San Antonio chapter, and I am the current chair of PRSA Southwest District, and that is 6 states and 15 chapters across those states. Most chapters hold an annual awards program. Here in San Antonio, we refer to it as the Del Oro Awards, and I've been a part of that process for about 10 years now. With that, we have the opportunity to recognize outstanding campaigns and tactics. So I've had the opportunity to take a look at and participate in the awards for a good 10 years now. Gives you the opportunity to see fantastic work. We have a stellar level of a PR community here in San Antonio. So it allows me to up my game a bit. I get to see what other professionals are doing. It also gives me the opportunity when I'm presenting my own work to see where I may have had holes, things that we could have done better. So it really is an opportunity after you've implemented something to take that step back, do that deep dive, really explain why you did what you did, how you did it, the results you achieved. And I think one of the strongest things, the learnings that you have, because every campaign, every effort, there's always something that you could do better, do differently. It's something that you want to implement the next go around. And those learnings, I think, really make you a better pro overall.
I know fans of the show will already be familiar with RPIE, but maybe we could start with defining RPIE and then telling us a little bit about the research section and what you're looking for there.
Sure. So RPIE, and I really wish it spelled a word instead of RPI. The acronym isn't what we want it to be from that standpoint. Research, planning, implementation, and evaluation. And before I jump into research, when I'm looking at something, I feel, and this has to be part of your research, you're really going to do a strong situation analysis. You'll always hear people talk about SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But I think at times we go into something with assumptions. Research is what really gives you the opportunity to see what is truly going on. If you base a campaign on a false assumption, your campaign's not going to work. So you need to take that opportunity to do that research and really dig in. And it's what is the world that we're dealing with? What is the challenge that we have? Who are the audiences that we're trying to reach? You may have budgetary challenges, and how are you going to address that? You've really got to dig into everything. And it doesn't necessarily, when everyone hears research, they automatically think, I don't have budget for a focus group. I don't have time for a survey. It's not necessarily that you have to do that. Secondary research works as well, especially now with the amount of data that is available online. You are able to slice and dice numbers without having to spend the money on a focus group or do surveys. If you have the ability to do that, it will always help you refine what you're doing. But there are other ways that you can dig in and really make certain that what you are about to do with the rest of RPI is based on true facts and not just assumptions. A lot of times a client may come to you with a problem. The problem is correct, but they may not understand what's the real audience that they need to reach to be able to meet their goal, what challenge may be out there, what competitors are doing. And competitive analysis is huge when you're looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to really help define where are the opportunities for us to go after, where are the threats that we need to plan for, what are the weaknesses we have to work around. And so if you don't dig in on the research, I really don't feel that the rest of what you do is going to be effective. So that's the R part of it all.
It sounds like what you're saying is the foundation of the entire plan rests on our ability to make sure we're getting good answers to the right kinds of questions? Can you discuss the kinds of questions that you ask?
Everything that we work on, I sometimes think clients probably feel that I'm an investigative reporter because we ask so many questions. Trust that deep knowledge base to really make things work. And so we always ask timeline first. Frankly, it is always easier to tackle something when you have more time than we have to turn this around in a month. Budget. What is the budget for us to be able to implement things? And to really tell us what's the problem. One of the questions I always ask is, what does success look like? What is it when all of this is said and done? How are they going to view that this successfully moves a needle for them? If you're putting together a campaign plan for an event that they're implementing, what's their attendance goal? If you are doing something from a sales standpoint, what are their sales goal? What's the amount of money that they're trying to raise? What is that image what do they have in mind at the beginning? Because you need to know what you can then structure to make it happen. Quite frankly, not all goals are possible. You can't go from no one knows about this event to we have sold 500,000 tickets overnight, unless you're Taylor Swift. Then you don't have to even worry about public relations. But you need to make certain that what they are looking for, you have the tools in place to make it happen. And that has to be an honest conversation at times with clients, because if they're coming to you and there's no branding, there's no graphics, they don't have what they need, you're going to have to then work with them to find solutions to all of that. And so that you have what you need to make something happen. And every situation is different. It's why I don't have a standard set of questions. It's more of a conversation that you have, but you have to know what they're looking for so that you know whether or not that's even something that's manageable within a campaign.
You mentioned branding, and a lot of times people don't realize how much branding is connected to public relations. Can you speak a little bit to that? And what are maybe some other misconceptions that clients might have in that first conversation?
From a branding standpoint, that is who all of your publics know you as. And I think there's a misconception a lot when we say public relations. Everyone assumes we're talking about the media. Well, that's media relations. But when you look at all of the publics, you could be talking about your board of directors. You could be talking about your employees, your sponsors, your donors, your end customer. Depending on what you're doing, your audience is not all in one. But your brand should always be. That brand should be clear no matter who you're talking with. They should have the same image of your organization. You want to make certain that your message is always consistent and that people understand who your brand is across all of those audiences. So there are times when people say something about, but I'm not worried about, I'm like, no, we have to be founded in who you are. And there may be a time that they want to do something that is off-brand. And that's then a difficult conversation. It's like, okay, so you're an art museum, but you want to hold a rock festival. How does this tie back to who you are? How does this help you move the needle? And it may be that they're looking to expand the audience and get people to look at them differently. Perfectly fine. But you need to make certain that whatever the initiative is ties back to their brand and is ultimately going to deliver a message that strengthens their brand and doesn't take away.
Covered a lot of things there. Specifically, working with clients who want to go off in a different direction that might not serve them. Can you speak a little bit more to that and maybe some examples that you have that would serve our audience to understand how do you communicate with clients who might not be doing what's in their best interest in the realm of public relations?
I feel that there almost needs to be a class on how to have difficult conversations, because that's the client, or it doesn't even have to be a client. It could be your boss. If you're an internal, if you're an internal team and your boss has this great idea, but it's not probably going to meet the results that you need, how do you even have that conversation? So a lot of that goes back to the exploratory discussions. I just had a meeting yesterday, summer campaigns. What are we going to do to help draw people in for the summer? And in this case, the CEO has a great idea, and it's cute, it's fun, but it does not tie back to any of their other initiatives. And so the team can put a lot of creativity to it and put this together, but that's going to mean design spend and printing and mailing costs and all this. and it most likely is not going to resonate. It does not fit with what their larger initiative is. And so I started asking the questions. So tell me how, tell me why, how do you see this delivering for you? What is your goal? What are you hoping to have happen once we implement this? And often when you're asking those questions, the answers start, you can almost see the idea bubbles. The answers start to come and go, well, okay. And they almost can get to that point on their own. At the same time, you should have a strong enough relationship. And this is even if you are the employee speaking back to your boss, to be able to say, I disagree, and here's why. And it can't really be subjective. It can't be, oh, I just don't like that. You have to have firm, this is not going to meet our audience needs. That whatever it is, you need to then put your disagreement with that idea into a context that's based on facts and based on what you're seeing. There's even an opportunity to go, I'm not certain that I want to explore it more. Let's talk about it more. Let me do some research before we go down this path. Because it could be something that they've never thought about for an audience, a different tool, a different tactic, but we need to pull that data together and make certain that it's going to get them where they want to go, which is why that timeline and planning is so key, because ultimately there could be something that on the face may not seem like a great idea, but once you dig in, it is, or something that's on its face is not a great idea, and you need the opportunity to then pivot to something that will.
So still in the research phase, we're making sure that objectives make sense. Can you speak a little bit about objectives before we move on to the planning phase? Because I know these are interrelated and we do research and planning sometimes at the same time. Oh no, right?
Exactly. Well, so planning, when you get to that part and how they can be so intertwined, it's interesting. People often confuse goals and objectives. Goals are those broad, your goal, of course, is always to sell more or get more people to attend. But your objectives, that's where another acronym comes into play, and that's the SMART. They need to be simple, and it should be written so clearly that anyone can understand what your objective is. Measurable. This one is key, because if you can't measure it, once you implement everything, you have no way to evaluate what your success ultimately was. So you have to be able to sit there and go, okay, we want to have 1,500 people attend this event, or whatever your hard number is. How are you then going to measure that when you get down the line to the E in the evaluation aspect of RPIE? Attainable. Going back to my 500,000 ticket sales. Is it something that's truly obtainable? You can't just put in your objective, well, I want to sell 500,000 tickets to this brand new festival. Is that something that's even attainable in your first year? Which we have to jump to reliable first, and making certain that what you're doing is founded in firm, what you are already working on, where they're going. It's not some pie in the sky. That goes back to goals, not to what your firm objectives are. And then timeline. That T, because you always want to be able to then show your measurement within a certain time frame. Putting it into an internal communications perspective. So you've introduced a new employee newsletter, and one of your objectives could be that you want to have a 50% open rate within the first week of a newsletter hitting someone's mailbox. So that gives you the time frame. It gives you your measurable, because you're going for that 50%. You could actually add in your number of employees if you want to, but that gives you something that down the line, when you're evaluating it, you can turn around and say, the new format was a huge success. We had a 65% open rate within the first 2 days and a 75% open rate in the first week. You're able to then really put your evaluation and provide those data points. So if you're not putting data points in your objectives, you won't have that valid data points to put into your evaluations.
It makes sense. In the research phase, what about focus groups? Because I know that the answers you get from the focus group or from your research or from your secondary research might not be the ones you wanted or expected. How do you deal with that?
That's why research is so important. If you get feedback, it could be, so let's go back to what we were just talking about with newsletters. You could find out, that could be the plan, that you're going to implement a new employee newsletter. Through your focus groups, you find out that the bulk of your employees don't check their email weekly. Think about a warehouse where employees are not sitting at a desk and they may not have regular access to email on the clock while they're working for you. That may then change what your communication tactics are going to be. You may still be putting together the same information, but how are you delivering it? Years ago, I worked with General Motors, and one of the ways that they made certain that their employees were communicated with within their production facilities, constant video stream. They had televisions that were always doing a GM news. And that was part of everything that they did. If they were introducing a new product, if there was something going on with General Motors, they would report on stock prices. But that was how, because it was in the break room, it was in the workout facilities that they had. But those employees did not have the opportunity to sit down, and these were in the days before smartphones. They didn't have the opportunity to sit down and read through an email. But they did have the chance while they were on a break to watch the news headlines and see what was going on with GM that day.
And there are things there that could probably translate to other companies that aren't as big, the companies that maybe don't have those kinds of resources for internal public relations, right?
Yes. From that standpoint, and things have changed. We always talk about the new tools and what we have and the fact that we all walk around with, a computer in our hand now. But if you're on a production facility floor, and I can tell you, from a car manufacturing standpoint, they don't want those on the floor because you have the opportunity for an employee to be distracted, potentially cause damage to the line. They could potentially get injured. So there's a lot of rules and things that are in place for different workplaces that you need to then factor into what you're doing. That's part of your research phase. So if from a focus group standpoint, if you come in and think, oh, we can't do the newsletter, so how else can we tackle this? How else can we get this information out? And I know apps are one of the things that, then people pop up and think about. Same thing. How are you judging engagement, and how are you going to get your messages across in that platform versus a newsletter or a video? I sometimes think we're spoiled by the number of ways we can communicate with people now. But if you're not communicating in a channel that they're going to see, then your effort's going to fail. I can get a client on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, but if that's not what their customers are reading, then that's not going to move the needle. So you have to go where your audiences are, and you have to engage with them on channels that they embrace and use, or you're talking to no one.
And that audience piece is so important. So we've talked about the situation, we've talked about the audience. Are there any other pieces in the situation, the audience, that we need to get right before we think about some other things?
I think knowing how to reach them, where to reach them, and that comes back from a media relations standpoint. When we're looking at what's ultimately going to be a public-facing campaign, depending on your niche, if you're going for younger generation versus older generation, and we're all seeing the change and the shift in our media landscape and the challenges that our friends in print media are having. And yet there is a dedicated niche of readers who follow that print outlet. And so you have to think through, what's the audience there and how am I going to reach them? Influencers. Your older audience may not be following influencers online, whereas that might be the key for you to reach that younger demographic. So it's not just, and I hate to say that because then I know I'm going to have people in the older demographic going, wait a minute, I follow TikTok and I do all of this. So it might not necessarily be about age as it is about technology and those adopters and where do they really like to be. And how are you then going to use those channels to reach them?
And as you're thinking through all of these different dimensions of research, you're also thinking ahead to planning. How do you connect the research in a way that it's time to go to the planning phase? Are they really that intertwined where I'm really planning the same time as I'm doing the research?
They really are that intertwined. But every step of your plan should tie back to something that you learned in your research. So yes, they're intertwined, but research has to come first. And you may then have to tweak that plan before you can actually implement. Your plan should really be how and what you're doing, or what you're doing and how. So what are you tackling and how are you going to tackle it? And your plan part is where your goals and objectives really need to be outlined. And again, time frame has to be key. Resources have to be outlined in that. So, jumping forward to an awards conversation, you need to be able to say, staff hours that were included, budget that was there. It could be that you're using a video that you didn't have to produce because it was already done in another area or used for another tool and you're pulling it in. So you need to be clear on what your resources are so that you know that you're going to be able to confidently implement this. But from an award standpoint, this is going to sound crazy. Well, not crazy, but you're going to understand. If you say I had a $50,000 budget and a full year to do something, wow, the ones that are harder to tackle, think about a nonprofit who really does not have extra money in their budget for much of what they're doing. And so when you can say this was done with X amount of staff hours, it was all done internally, repurposed, it actually is a bit more impressive. I like to say that if you've spent time in a nonprofit, you probably have more skills than anyone realizes because you learn how to do more with less, fewer resources. You really stretch not just your time, your staff, but your money as well. And that innovative and different ways to use things to really make your resources work for you can truly make something shine from an awards category.
Thinking, okay, what sets these plans apart? What sets the planning phase apart? We talked a little bit about the research phase and what sets good plans apart there. But what is it about the planning part? What is it that really draws your attention to strategies or tactics or audience or situation? What are the things that you love to see?
It has to be thorough. You really want to showcase that you have thought through everything, that you have thought through the audiences, that you've thought through the tools, that you've looked at and you are applying that research so that every part of your plan has that foundation. And you have to, plan is just your plan. And sometimes it's hard. You want to start talking about implementation. So you don't really give the plan the time that it deserves, but you really want the plan to clearly outline what you will be doing, why you're doing it this way. And that should be based back on your research. Don't jump into the implementation part yet, because implementation really should be separate. Your plan also has to include those data points. Make certain that, once again, what you learned from the research phase is then carried through into your plan, because that ties it all together. Everything that you've learned in your research should ultimately be that thread that you can see through the plan, the implementation, and the evaluation.
So some weaknesses in the what and the why. I'm sure you see plans that you're like, oh, I need more on the what side, or you see plans and you're like, oh, I need more on the why side. Where are some of those most common mistakes? Are they more on the what, or are they more on the why?
I think it's a little bit of both. Sometimes people will throw a tactic in just to throw a tactic in, but it doesn't tie back to their research. It doesn't tie into an objective necessarily. They just threw something in there to add it in. At times, less is more. So instead of trying to be everywhere and everything to everyone all at once, go with your strength and really show this is what we did and this is what we're doing. See, I'm even jumping into the implementation part. This is what we're doing, and here's the why. So those strategies and the tactics, and people want to group those two together. You always hear them put together, but a tactic is what is carrying out your strategy. So you really shouldn't confuse the two. A press release is not a strategy. It's a tactic. Media relations is your strategy. How you're then doing that may be through influencer outreach. It may be through a press release. It may be through a press conference. But those are your tactics. And by the way, each of those tactics, once again, have to tie back to what those objectives are, and they need to show measurable data points. So if you're saying you're going to hold a press conference, how many attendees, what sort of coverage are you looking for, and what's your time window from that? Sometimes if you're working with a long lead publication, you may not get that breaking news coverage, but you might have the opportunity to do an in-depth feature story with an outlet. And so you're still moving the needle in a certain way. But you want to be able to say, we're looking for X amount of coverage within such and such timeline. Press conferences tend to not be as popular these days. Our friends in journalism, it is harder and harder for them to be able to attend and be a part of those. So just sidebar, it has to be a really strong breaking news story for me, something that is just big enough that it will justify that. I think about it of the local, 6 o'clock news producer. Why are they going to make a reporter and a camera available to attend that press conference? Is that large enough? Because every client always, we need to do a press conference. We can probably gain that same amount of coverage by providing strong media release, strong visuals, B-roll, having people available for interviews. And then you're meeting the media where they are instead of making them come to you and basically drop everything. Our journalism friends these days have so much on their plate, whether it's TV or print. Not only are they producing the print content and what's going to be on air, they're doing digital, they're doing social, they are repackaging so much. The more that you can do to help them tell your story, and a press conference isn't always the best way to help them tell your story. So that's just from a tactic standpoint. Whereas it used to be a standard. If you had news to announce, you automatically had a podium, did an announcement that way. And it's just not something that I see that is still effective for most initiatives these days. But once again, going back to that strategies and tactics and the why and, where there are holes, if you're going to keep saying it, if you were based on your research, everything that you were doing, you shouldn't just throw in random tactics. All of your strategies should then have tactics that tie back and implement those. And all of those should then be tied back to your lovely, smart objective.
And the word that we use for this is alignment, right? Can you think of how things have to align and where things often don't align where they should? Can you think of some specific examples where you're reading and you're like, wait a second, there's not a clear connection in thought between this research and this particular strategy. And now we have a tactic over here that doesn't even match the research. So all these things have to align. Where do you see holes more often than not?
More often than not, it's throwing in those tactics that really don't tie back to anything. You don't have to do something just to do it. And I think so often in public relations, we get that challenge of showing the ROI. And I think that there are times that we then knee-jerk just want to put everything out there in an effort to really show that we've covered all of our bases without truly relying on that plan as we're doing that implementation. So if something comes up in implementation that perhaps doesn't match with your research, and if you hit a challenge or something of that nature, you need to go back and you need to be able to explain that as you're implementing. We were doing X and then we discovered, and to address that, we changed to do XYZ. Because guess what? We're doing this in the real world. So your research may have been really solid. Something may have changed. There might have been something going on in the environment that you didn't anticipate, you couldn't have anticipated. One of the things on that, when you're doing something from a media relations standpoint, breaking news will always change what you're doing. To use an example that we had to deal with, we put out a press release the same day as the Robb Elementary shooting. There was no way. Our press release went out in the morning. And of course, everyone knows what happened with that. There was absolutely no way we were going to receive any press coverage. And the client understood, everyone understood. We went dark. We chose in the next 2 weeks to do absolutely nothing because it was a San Antonio local story that we were promoting. It would have made us and our client seem tone deaf for us to be promoting something that was lighthearted, fluff news in light of what had happened. And so we pivoted. And when we did go back to the media, it was a much quieter tone, a different tone. We ultimately received coverage, but it wasn't the same as it might have been if that hadn't happened. I've had things happen where you have a fire, an accident. We've had media who were supposed to be on site who literally get a call and get diverted. So your implementation is going to change because of the real world situation. And that's okay as long as you show how and why, or the why and why you had to change your plan, how you then chose to address that, and work around that challenge.
No plan necessarily can survive contact with the real world every time, right? So I wonder the strategy part. Can you think of some specific strategies that you've seen that have been really successful, or they might be common or uncommon? People might make mistakes with them. I want to know everything you can tell me about strategy, public relations strategy, just the strategy piece.
I think if you're any good at PR, you sort of have to be that Jack or Jill of all trades. You have to know the environment. You have to know the media. You have to be very aware of trends and what's going on. And this is where being flexible, being nimble at times can pay off. I'm sure everyone has noticed, going back to the Taylor Swift analogy, think through everything that we've seen this year where people are then tying to her coattails in some way or another. I mean, look at what the NFL did. The NFL has that whole situation to thank for an incredible increase in female viewership. They may not all be football fans, but now they are at least paying attention to the sport. But look at what everyone has done to tie into that trend. I saw a story just yesterday. Apparently, Taylor makes her own Pop-Tarts, and Kellogg's is trying to find out what her recipe is because they want to partner with her. Smart, because they are, even if they don't get to do anything, do you know how many eyeballs they probably received because they're just talking about the fact that Taylor makes her own Pop-Tarts? So they're automatically getting that halo effect of being associated with Taylor's name in some way. But all of that goes back to understanding what's going on and understanding the trends and the things that are out there. You never know where that next great idea may come from. But if you are not a voracious consumer of media, and for me, that means television, that means online, that means print. So I normally have a stack of magazines and newspaper. I am the old school person who does like to flip through them and see the layout, get a feel for it. It just comes across differently than a digital edition does, especially if the digital edition is not one that you can flip through and it's just something you're scrolling through. You also have to think about people who are consuming it on their phones, that media, how is it on a mobile platform? And think about how your client's story is going to come across on that mobile platform. What are the visuals that you're going to be able to provide the media to help tell that story? Which is why we're so heavily reliant on video these days, really strong photography. And yes, it used to be you had to create a B-roll package where you had a camera crew come out and, edit everything. Now you can do B-roll on your phone and edit it into something that will ultimately end up on the 6 o'clock news. So looking at all of that, I think you have to always be aware of what's going on and look for how it ties back in. Where is it? Okay, so this is now a trend. Now, Kellogg's is not a client, but like I said, smart. Somebody on their team saw her mention that she makes her own Pop-Tarts, and there you go. So they wouldn't have known that. It's not like Taylor called them up and said, by the way, I make my own Pop-Tarts. That was, I guarantee you, they are monitoring, and Pop-Tarts popped up in one of their online alerts. And so we use alerts to keep up with all sorts of different things so that we can look for those trends, and it's not just from a positive standpoint. You also want to make certain from a crisis standpoint that you're not missing anything, that there's nothing, that might be breaking that could harm your story, your client, or anything like that. But I think that's where some great creativity can come across. But if you aren't aware of what the latest trend is on Insta, what's going on TikTok, what is it that the local news is most interested in covering right now? You've got to be able to know all of that and bring that knowledge. Yes, you can research it as you're working on a campaign. That's when you're building the right media list and that sort of thing. But if you really want to be good at this, you have to be constantly consuming media and knowing what's going on.
When they ask, what are you doing? I'm doing research. Where are you? I'm on social media doing research, right? I think that's something that people can embrace and get behind, because a lot of times we think of social media as one of those things that might be taking away, but we can really add value to our jobs if we're curating our feed and we're paying attention to the right things with our clients in mind. So the strategy could be informed by that research diet of certain social media channels, by that research diet of the print that you mentioned. I wonder, in terms of strategy, the digital and the print, do you see things moving more towards a hybrid? Do you see a whole bunch of energy and influence being thrown into digital? How is this relationship playing out in our current landscape?
You know, I don't think anyone has the answer to that just yet. It's hard to see, and there's a ton of stories right now about news deserts and how, newsrooms continue to shrink. And the challenge then becomes, if you're not going to have print subscribers, how do you manage that firewall and all of that content that you're creating? And we as consumers are used to that free content. Quality content comes at a cost. So finding what is that level, what is that subscription rate, what's that firewall, how are you going to get subscribers to be willing to pay for that? And I don't think anyone has that answer right now. And then you look at newsrooms and they are scrambling to try to cover everything and be everywhere and get those eyeballs and keep the advertisers happy. And I'm not certain that an advertising platform, which is how things have always worked in the past, advertising and subscriptions, I'm not certain that that's really going to work to carry things forward. When you look at, if you want to, look at where we are now, look at cable television and the fact that everyone, first of all, we all had antennas. Then everyone flocked to cable and or satellite. And now people are streaming away from that for streaming, yet most of the streaming services are having trouble finding profitability. So the initial sales were, you don't have to watch any ads. Now they're having to drop their subscription price and offer ad tiers to try to, fix all of that. And so I would love to have a crystal ball on what's ahead as far as that digital, print, and really even broadcast, because all of the broadcast outlets also have everything online. And so, it's one thing, you want to be where your audience is, but there has to be a way for them to monetize that. And I think from a PR standpoint, when I look at it and I put on my PRSA hat and I think about the bigger trends, we really have to pay attention to what's happening in the media space, because the media that we work with may not be around as we think of them today. And that's going to change how we do our jobs.
And some of those strategies, especially tactics, are going to change. Maybe the critical thinking and the strategic thinking might be very similar and look similar, but those tactics are definitely going to change with those kinds of changes in the media landscape. I hope we have a fifth estate that is strong. I hope that we have, a robust media that does the work that we can't do because we have other jobs, right? I hope that they're able to survive the things that are happening now. And I hope that public relations is there to help them with that. Can you speak a little bit to that, to how the tactics of public relations specifically help to serve the media landscape?
Well, it's interesting because we always joke about PR is the dark side. And so then when we have a journalist join, when they join the communications profession from journalism, that they've joined the dark side. And I don't view it that way anymore. I think it was very different when we were perhaps in a PR ivory tower and we were putting out press releases and, just setting up interviews and that sort of thing. I think now we're more entwined than ever. If you have strong media relationships, it's not just about pitching, because yes, you need those relationships to get the coverage, but it's knowing what is it that they cover. I take my PR hat off and do some freelance writing every now and then. And so it's interesting for me to then be on the media side and get a pitch. And I know, well, sure, you sent me everything, but did you even look at what I normally cover or what the publication normally covers? And I see that and I hear that across the board. That goes back to knowing the media that you're actually pitching to and understanding what their audience is, what they cover. If you're doing a story on real estate, don't send it to the features reporter. It's not, your features reporter isn't going to have anything to do with that. So, I think that good PR practitioners understand that and then work with the media and can make their jobs easier. So yes, I'm going to give you the images that you need. I'm never going to tell you no comment because that's not doing my job for a client. I'm going to find out what your deadline is, and I'm going to make certain that we get back to you before that deadline. Good reporters usually lie about their deadlines because they know that there are times that we need more time to make something happen. But we are going to be a strong partner for them and get them what they're asking for or to help them get access. And when you have the opportunity to sit down in a media roundtable and, we always ask, and we hear the same complaints that we don't respond or, well, I got in touch with you and you told me no comment, and so I think the strong practitioners are the ones who do their best to really partner with them. The stories aren't always going to be positive. It is impossible for every news story about your client or your organization to be positive, but you can work with them so that they are balanced and that they are fair. And I know that there are going to be people who go, wait, the coverage, what? It happens. But if you are doing your job and really working with them, then your side you had the opportunity for it to be fairly represented. Hopefully, crossing those fingers. There is some aspect of what we do. We are not paid media. We are not advertising. And I think that is becoming harder for some people to understand. We can't guarantee you coverage. We can set everything up. We can work. We can make certain that we have provided all of those tools. Something may not resonate. A reporter may not be interested. A producer may not be interested. If you want to guarantee that that is going to get out there, then you can buy the time. That's the difference between earned media, which is earned through your relationships and your work with the journalists, versus the paid media. And I think now it's becoming, those lines are getting more and more blurred. There used to be a true wall between those. And I'm not seeing pay to play coverage necessarily in all outlets, but there's an increasing number of outlets that are becoming pay to play, which is fine as long as that's disclosed. That's exactly why the FTC goes after influencers and social media. If you're not putting the required hashtags and things like that on there, and if you're doing that as a PR practitioner, it's unethical. And we have a code of ethics at PRSA. And so that's really not how you should be doing your job. And you shouldn't let a client ever try to make you do something that is unethical. If they want to buy it, that's great. Just make certain it's all disclosed.
Absolutely. That whole idea of ethics is embedded to every single step in the PRSA world, in the APR world, in the model world. Ethics is embedded in every single step of the process, which I think is really important as public relations professionals. The strategies and the tactics that are most creative that you've seen that were just like, wow, look at what this person did. What has stood out to you over the years and really got your attention in a way that maybe surprised you or made you think, wow, whenever you're reading those public relations plans specifically?
Well, it's interesting. I had the opportunity to judge a sister chapter. So in PRSA, we don't judge our own chapter awards. We work with another PRSA chapter. And so I had the opportunity to judge a sister chapter last fall. There was a small campaign. They were really just looking to grow an understanding disability awareness. And I've seen day in the life, those are day in the life videos done before. The way they put this together, and I think part of it was the person that they were featuring, it just resonated so well. And I think that's where that creative aspect comes in. It wasn't a creative or a different use of a tactic. It was how they told the story. So I picture it as the storyboard and the script, finding just the right video crew to put everything together. It just, when you watched it, you were moved and you wanted to support the organization. And it's not a cause that I have a personal connection with, but it just was so well done. And you could tell that they had really put the time and effort into everything to make it happen. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be this off the wall, never been seen before, but how are you really bringing a level of excellence to what you're putting together? There's a campaign that was it's in our current awards process, and I can't wait to see, because I've just heard about it and I got to see some of the materials. And I'm not, in case they don't get recognized, I'm not going to identify any of it. But it was so unique, patterned off of a national competition. They completely flipped the script, made it totally San Antonio related, added in some fantastic viral components. I was really impressed, and what was really neat was that it's a young practitioner who put it together. And so I look at that and go, wow. I mean, he took innovative, spun it a different way. It doesn't really, it's outside of the box for what his organization would usually do. Went after a different audience. His results were phenomenal. Hoping to see that campaign is one that gets recognized when we get our award judging back in a few weeks, because it was just outstanding. And so I think part of it is just that creativity. Even in a press release, when you're putting something together, what is it? Think about the fact that most reporters or producers are probably getting 200 emails a day. So what is it that how are you going to set it apart? What's that creative angle? What's that cool headline? How can you make this stand out? And I think that PR professionals overall, an incredibly creative crew. So it's always fun to see the messaging, how it gets tweaked, just something fun. I'm not certain that we give ourselves enough credit at times for what we put together and the creativity that we bring to it all.
And that creativity that you see in these plans, whenever we move into the implementation, do you ever see things in the news and you're like, wow, I know there's a skilled practitioner behind this story? And that just blew my mind. Can you think of some examples or some stories that you've seen be super successful whenever you're in your normal media diet?
Years ago, when I was working with General Motors, we actually had a partnership with Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus. And for the first time ever, we were actually going to have a vehicle within the 3 rings. It was actually going to be in the circus tent. They'd never done that before. And it was a new vehicle that General Motors was introducing. To help it stand out, we actually had elephants wash the car. I had nothing to do with the training of the elephants, just to make that clear. It was something that they already knew. We set it up. It was actually in downtown Fort Worth. We set it up, and we only had a couple of camera crews come out from local. However, it hit the wires, and it was the fun, feel-good story that ended newscasts across the country. So, because here, they're talking about the fact, and General Motors is working with Ringling, and here's an elephant, washing the car, getting ready for the circus. It's been too long. I don't remember how many hits we ended up with, but nationally we were on, I know it was more than 100 different news. That fun, we don't necessarily see those fun, uplifting stories at the end of newscasts now, but that was always how they liked to sign off. And so it was amazing. And the ROI on that was through the roof because we owned the vehicles. The circus was already in town, so we weren't having to set anything up. We didn't even have to record our own video because it was the CBS affiliate. They put it out there, and it wasn't just to other CBS stations. We ended up on all of the networks. So yes, when I see things on the news, so I'm like, what PR person put that together? So, you kind of become a bit of a jaded news consumer doing what we do, but it's fun. And then the reverse, when we have something happen in town, take the lovely winter storm. Every time I saw a story that was talking about power outages or water problems, I knew the local communicator who was behind putting all of that out. So I will always send them my best and think of them when we have weather situations pop up, when we have outages. Our school communicators, or all of our utilities, via, just all of those groups, when something is impacting the San Antonio airport, there are communicators who are gathering that information and managing the media requests. And I'm not certain that your general audience, general public necessarily recognizes that, but I always tip my hat to them because they are working around the clock to get the news into the journalists' hands and make certain that the general public knows what's going on.
Definitely want to ask you about crisis communication because it sounds like there's a lot of threads there that we could explore. Before we do that, the strategies and tactics that you specifically cited and you talked about, like the elements that made that story work. It's visual. It's combining two American institutions, the circus and General Motors. Like, what are the elements that make a story like that so viral? What are the ingredients that you're looking for when you're trying to craft moments like that or trying to repeat that kind of magic in a bottle?
Well, first of all, if you were trying to go viral, bottom line, you will not. That is lightning in a bottle. So you never know what. And everyone always thinks, oh, well, think back to stories that we saw everywhere. The Ice Bucket Challenge. Who would have guessed that the Ice Bucket Challenge would go on to be everywhere, would have so much celebrity participation, would raise so much money? It was one idea. And so I think we set ourselves up for failure when we this is going to go viral. But it's storytelling. What are the elements there that are going to make this a strong story? Because your friends in journalism are then, media is going to grab it because it's a strong story. Your audience is going to connect with it. And you said visual. What's the visual? What is it that you are going to be able to put with that even if they don't even have to see the press release, they just see it and go, oh, this is fantastic. This is something I have to cover. So visual needs to be strong. Your messaging has to be strong. How is it? What is it that you were saying in all of this? And honestly, the message with the elephants was very simple. We just wanted people to tie the two together. We weren't necessarily worried about it. It was a brand new car. No one knew about it. So automatically for them to even get to see the vehicle was a win for us because it was a vehicle that most people probably didn't know. It was a name that people didn't know. And so all of that combined. So what's the story? What is it? Is it going to pull at heartstrings? Is it funny? What is it that you are really getting across? And then what's the call to action? Because that has to be part of it. There are those feel-good stories, and we didn't necessarily have a call to action when we were having elephants wash the car. But if you're doing something where you promote an event, your call to action, ultimately, you want them to buy tickets. You want to sell sponsorships. So you need to think about what's that end, what's that result, what you want, and how is what you're doing going to help you get there? Because I have seen creative tactics used that then the story gets lost. What you're really trying to get across doesn't resonate. And so you had something that was fantastic, but what do people walk away from and knowing? And the easiest way to look at that is from an advertising standpoint. Think of all of those Super Bowl ads. There are times that the next day, people might be able to go, oh yeah, I remembered Arnold Schwarzenegger was in one, but can't tell you what the product was or it had any clue what they should be buying. So it's the same thing. You need to make certain that the story that you're telling really ties back and is strong enough that people are going to recognize it and then want to do something about it. And where I see some of the strongest aspects on that come back to the nonprofit. Let's go back to what was going on, pandemic and the challenges that we had, not just locally, but across the country as far as people in food bank lines and things like that. And so I know of a local campaign where that's what they started setting up. And it was parking lot drop-offs and being able to do more, giving people another way to be able to support what was needed. And they had fantastic success with that. And the timing was right. They were responding to a need. The media was more than happy to cover it because it was helping those in need. And so you've got to make certain that what you're doing actually fits with that larger messaging. And with that, the client just wanted to help, but then everyone walked away with the feeling that they were strong community partners. And it gives you that overall positive brand awareness. And so it might not have moved the needle. They weren't trying to sell anything. They were just getting their name out there in a very positive light.
Through the power of storytelling and the name of both of our organizations, mine is Storytelling Movement, yours is Tale to Tell. We love storytelling. We love storytelling. This is what drives this, isn't it? Are there other pieces of storytelling that you see popping up in successful planning strategies and research and connecting it to implementation? Are there implementation stories that you're like, wow, they really executed that well? And what are the pieces to that puzzle?
That goes back to thinking through the different tactics that you can use, so depending on the story that you're trying to tell, and remember, that story needs to meet the audience and the audience needs to be able to see that story. And so there are times when we might have a strong story, but we don't have a good visual. And so then how do you work through? And so much media is consumed right now from a video standpoint. And so I look at everything of what's that video that we're going to be able to do. And even it used to just be you had to have a strong photo, and that might pop up in a news feed. Reels, everyone is going to be scrolling through that. What's going to make them stop? What's going to make them pause and actually click and engage with something? Because I think that's one of our challenges right now. You can be everywhere, but if people aren't engaging with your story, then your story's not getting the job done. And then one of the ways to help make them engage is all of that compelling visual, the compelling story, narrowing it down. What are your message points? We really haven't talked about that standpoint of going back to, we talked about branding earlier. So what's the story that you're telling? What are those message points and how do they tie back to your brand? What aspect of your brand is that story going to help you remind your audience of, make them do something, make them feel a certain way about you? So just telling a story to tell a story doesn't get the job done. You have to have a rationale behind what that story is.
That rationale comes from experience and working with clients to figure out how to connect the rationale, the objectives, the situational analysis. It's not just one piece, right? It's all these different pieces. And in the evaluation piece, what specifically do you see standing out in really successful campaigns? What kind of metrics are they celebrating?
That goes back to those objectives being really strong, having that measurable aspect. And so it's not necessarily that there's a certain type of metric that they're celebrating. It's that their metrics should be clear. And there are times that I've actually liked a campaign that didn't meet its metrics, but they explained why. They did a dive to look at what didn't work. And that goes back to the learning and how you can then improve upon it, either the next time you're doing something with that client, the next time your boss asks you for something. Have to take those learnings. If not, you're on this treadmill doing the same thing time and time again. So I've had people say, well, it didn't hit everything I wanted it to. Okay, why? And can you explain that? Because there are times when something just doesn't hit. But that doesn't mean that you weren't strong in your research or your execution. What was the rationale? What is it that caused it to not have that impact? And it could be something as simple as our research showed that this was the right channel, but when we look at engagement numbers were low. Some of that can even be tied back to our friends at Meta and the fact that they constantly change algorithms on us. And so we've even had shifts for people when Google went to G4 and all of that. That data has learnings. And so spending that time to dig in, and there are times when the media landscape is shifting so fast that what we put in place may not have resonated because of some of those shifts. But if you realize that and then can retool next time, then your campaign still had a value because you've learned from it and you'll be able to better implement in the next go.
You mentioned the shifts and adapting, thinking about, of course, generative artificial intelligence and how SEO experts are now having to learn GEO, right? Do you speak a little bit to the role of artificial intelligence in public relations and how might it be a good thing or a bad thing?
It's interesting. And PRSA actually has covered this from an ethics standpoint and is really looking at how we should be using AI. It's a helpful tool, but to me, it's just a tool. It can't be all that you're doing. You may want to put a writing prompt in that's going to help generate ideas. I've seen people who are using it to help generate lists, to give them ideas for things to use for social media posts. It's like any other tool. You have the opportunity to use it. Just don't abuse it, and you still have to put the human element back into that. So I can look at two pieces, and you can tell it's getting better, but you can tell that robotic voice. It's just not the same. Early on, I started doing some testing. I was curious to see. I would put writing prompts in, and I actually asked it to write some press releases for clients. I wanted to see, and part of it, you have to remember, it's trolling online to see what it can pull. So for me, it was actually interesting to see what it found online about some of my clients. And then I turned around and used that as ideas for where we had holes, what we needed to do to tweak our messaging to be stronger in certain areas. If that's all that AI was finding about that client, that means that some of what we have online isn't strong enough. So it was almost like having a mini research assistant with me to be able to do some of that. That's where I see most practitioners using it right now, is from a time saving standpoint. I don't know anyone who is using it to really just generate content that they are not editing, because frankly, sometimes it's wrong. That's the other interesting standpoint. And I have a number of clients that will not allow their internal teams to use AI in any component whatsoever. If you work in a financial realm, there are all sorts of compliance issues and things. And so, we're in the very infancy of all of this. There's a lot about AI that concerns me, just from the opportunity to be able, the deep fakes and that sort of thing. But I also think that there's opportunities for our industry that we need to be open to. We just also need to not, I'm never going to think that the computer is going to write a better press release than a really strong content creator.
I think it connects nicely with crisis communication and crisis communication planning, because I see people trying to employ AI to think about and get ideas for crisis communication planning. And I like the idea of getting ideas. I came and I spoke to PRSA in San Antonio about artificial intelligence, because we're using it in university system and educational systems in hopefully creative ways that do not detract from critical thinking and writing skills that are so important. So I'm thinking about, okay, we're looking at a good crisis communication plan. What are the elements there? Because if you don't know the elements, AI can't help you, right?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. You can actually, and I just saw something the other day, that there's a whole little cottage industry now on words and prompts and how to make AI work more strongly for you. So even just typing, what should I include in a crisis communication plan? It's interesting to see what comes out of that. But when you're looking at a crisis communication plan, first of all, no matter how much you plan, you can't be prepared for everything. You are trying to anticipate and have the tools ready. So that means that you have identified, before anything happens, you have identified a chain of command who's going to be involved in all of this. You have identified a spokesperson and a backup to that spokesperson. Some of it is simple as making certain that you've identified alternative ways to communicate. If you were in the midst of a crisis when AT&T went down a few weeks ago and you're all on AT&T, how are you communicating? And it was interesting on how many people said, well, I don't have a landline anymore. Or if you have a landline, it's voice over IP. So it's not really the old hard true landline. So how are you going to communicate? And I have friends who work in government communications. They are required to have hard lines, because if all else fails, you should still be able to access someone that way. But thinking through all of those components and how are you going to communicate, who has message approval? Because the worst thing that can happen is that you have 10 people saying 10 different things, all, representing the organization in this crisis. So all of that has to be clearly thought through beforehand. And then with an AI component, it's hard for me to wrap my head around, other than outlining the pieces of the puzzle that you might want to think about. I cannot imagine, and I'm sure AI is going to prove me wrong in no time at all, I cannot imagine that AI, it has enough strategy behind it to really look through all of those pieces of what you have to do, because frankly, there's so many different variables on what it could be. If you're in school communications, I guarantee you have a crisis plan now for violence on a campus. If you're CPS, you have a crisis plan on what happens when the grid goes down. So you have to custom and plan ahead for the likely potential of what could come up. Fire, feast, fire, famine, plague, pestilence, all of that. And so, but you're never going to be you can't pre-write what your statement is, because it's going to depend on what actually happened. You always, in some instances, you're going to have legal authorities involved, so if law enforcement is involved, and then how you navigate all of that. So I think every organization should always have a crisis plan in place, but they also need someone who is literally on call to update that as things happen, because the plan is there to give you structure, but you're not going to be able to just use a canned statement. And what happens if some of the people that are in your plan are part of that crisis and aren't available? So that's why you have to have redundancies in the plan to make certain that everything, to the best of your ability, is pre-covered and you can just implement that plan. And there are people who that is their unique specialty. And I'm always amazed at what they think through and the scenarios that they come up with, or the oddball things. But that's what we're here to do. We're here to navigate all of that for our clients or our organizations.
I love the breadth and depth of how you answered that crisis communication question. And it also made me think of how you were talking about earlier about placing media specifically on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Right. So like, I want to know, we had through the RPIE of that kind of an accomplishment, what is it that would help a practitioner to reach beyond their means and to get into a national publication on the front page like that? And obviously this connects nicely to crisis communication, because in the crisis, we often are having attention from national sources that we wouldn't have otherwise. Right?
Well, so connecting those dots and how to make that happen, part of that goes back to, you have to know that outlet and you have to know who you're pitching, because those pitches are really hard to get those to land. If you think local is inundated with media pitches, imagine a Wall Street Journal, a Today Show, let's put it into a broadcast standpoint. So you've got to know who they are, and you've got to be able to land in their inbox. And anymore, it's not even just inboxes. It is, you may be DMing them from a social media standpoint. You've got to be following them and knowing what they're interested in. And when the iron is hot, you have to strike. And so that's where, and we joke about sliding into their DMs. You're most likely, if you don't have a relationship with them, you are not going to have their cell phone. You're not going to be able to text them. But luckily, there are some reporters who are very open about that and will say, hey, here's my cell phone number, text me, get in touch with me. But that's where social media has almost been the great equalizer. Now they're all directly on X, formerly known as Twitter. I just hate that we have to say that whole thing, but they're on X. They are on Insta. You've got to know what channels they're active on. You've got to follow them, and you have to have that strong pitch when you send that direct message, because you've only got one shot. Or build a relationship with them beforehand so that it's not just the one shot, so that you get to know them. Oftentimes, they'll follow you back. If you're following them, they'll follow you back. They start to notice things. It's interesting to me now with some of our clients, they are now following our clients. So when our clients are putting something out on a social media feed, that's where a reporter might see it. So that's not a message that I may be controlling from a media relations standpoint, but I'm sitting there going, hey, if we're putting this out, let's talk about how you're messaging this on social, because you never know where they're going to see it. So it's making certain that's that story consistency. What's on the website? Are you putting your materials out on the website? Are your materials AI friendly, search engine friendly, all of that? Because you never know where they're going to find you. But it's much easier, I think, now than it used to be, thanks to being able to, be on your phone and, scrolling and stalking people. And yes, social media time is actually for work.
I was thinking about the social media landscape and how it connects to other parts of professional communication. It seems like back in the day, you didn't have to have a presence everywhere as a personal brand, and today you do. So even if you don't have a company like we do, you have to have a presence online just to get a job, it seems. Do you have any advice for the much smaller than a company, the much smaller than your normal client, for the person? Do you have any personal branding advice that I think would connect public relations planning and strategies with this idea of the person having to be everywhere too?
Well, and this is one, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, the cobbler's children have no shoes. Those of us who work in this field are often the worst about our own channels. And for me, I'm a boutique firm that is primarily referral based. So I don't have a huge website or social media presence for Tale to Tell. I'm active on social media. And yet I will also tell you there are times when I am exhausted by social media because you're not getting to just, you don't get to do it like a normal consumer. So you're not consuming it just for fun. That gear is always going on, oh, well, what about this? And what about that? And oh, let me check on this for this. So I don't get to just kick back and look at fun animal videos, although I do every once in a while. But for me and Tale to Tell, the first place, if you're talking about from a job perspective, you have to be on LinkedIn. If it's not for your company, if you're a person of one, you have to be on LinkedIn. And if you haven't noticed, LinkedIn has become the new water cooler. So we tend to get a shiny toy and we play with it for a while and then we move on. So Facebook was the shiny toy for a little while. Nobody really wants to play with the shiny toy of X anymore. That's a whole nother conversation that I don't want to get into. Insta, that was TikTok. So it's like, what's the new shiny toy before we drop that and move on? But LinkedIn is where professionals are meeting now. There's even stories about LinkedIn becoming where you can meet your next spouse or go on dates. There is a whole trend where people are DMing in LinkedIn. Interesting way to go about it. But I guess if it's a fellow PR professional, if nothing else, you know that you have PR in common. But you've got to be active on LinkedIn. You need a strong presence there. Think about what the image is, what that headshot is, and what the information that you're putting out there. So people are, well, I don't have a lot of job experience. Talk about what you're passionate about, the community service that you're doing. When I look at it from a student standpoint, what organizations are you involved in? And, there's always that chicken and the egg concept of, well, they say I need 2 years of experience, but I can't get 2 years of experience if I can't get hired anywhere. Broaden your definition of experience, because if you are volunteering somewhere, and I'll look at the students who are part of PRSSA and what they're doing. You are learning budgeting. You are learning event management. There are things that you are learning through your volunteer service that are directly applicable to your career. And so people need to take that bigger view. And if you have a job gap, there are ways to explain that now. You don't have to. I think back and everything was so staid, the one-page resume and that sort of thing. I wish more people did look at LinkedIn as their resume because it somewhat is that. But I am always cautious. You do not have to tell the world everything that you do, everything you know, everything you think. You don't have to post party pictures from everywhere that you go. When I am talking with students, curate your online presence and make certain that when an employer searches for you, they aren't going to find negative content that's going to make them question you.
Really important advice. So we've talked about personal branding, we've talked about crisis communication, we've talked about research, planning, implementation, evaluation. Are there any things that you really want people to know about public relations that maybe we haven't been able to cover as well in this conversation yet?
One of the things that I think people don't always think about, and this goes for awards and even for your plans when you're putting them together, and so you'll hear the phrase creative brief, which is, kind of outlining what you have in mind, but I take it needs to be deeper than that. That's where your RPIE comes in. Before you hand something to your boss or before you hand something to a client, hand it to someone that you trust who doesn't know anything about what you've put in that document. Because if they can then read it and understand your rationale, how you're going to do something, why you're going to do something, it will resonate better with the client or your boss. Because they may come back and go, well, can you tell me why you did such and such? Or what does this mean? And if it's not clear to them, you need to think about how it's going to be clear to a judge, if that's what you're doing for your award entry, or how it might be clear for a client who PR is not what they do. They have hired you to do all of this. So don't get stuck in the industry jargon and throw out cool phrases that you make it very clear, very concise, and don't make it a novel. And we look at awards, we actually, for a tactic, you have a 1-page situation analysis. For a campaign, you have 2 pages. You have to make every word count. And frankly, that's how we should communicate across the board. We are communicators, so make every word have impact. Edit, 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 And oh my gosh, no typos. I am not going to tell you that I've never had them, but no typos. That automatically, when a judge is looking at something, that comes across as, well, they put a typo in the award entry. How well did they really execute this campaign? So it's awful, but they are a fellow communicator and they are going to hold you to a higher standard. So make certain that you have scrubbed it, which usually means giving yourself the time. Procrastinators of the world, and I fall in that category many times. It's not so much procrastination as most of us have a lot on our plates. Put the time in, make that block of time to really dedicate and put your best foot forward from the plan on the way through. So, and if you've put together a great plan, there isn't any reason why you shouldn't turn that plan around and use it for an award entry.
Your answer made me think of media training and helping people to be on camera, because video is such an important part of public relations today. Do you have any advice for people who are trying to help people get on camera and tell the story for their client, or have the client tell the story for themselves?
Part of that, first of all, you need a strong messaging, speaking points, clear, concise, short. Make certain that they have the opportunity to read it, understand it, not memorize it, never memorize it. Because if you're memorizing it, you then, when your brain knows, wait, I didn't say that in the right order, and you automatically freeze. You can't do that on live TV, and you really don't want to do that when you're speaking to a reporter. And so you should have the opportunity for those spokespeople to take the time to really feel comfortable with it. And I usually explain it's a conversation, but it's a conversation where you're very short and concise. Often people will get tripped up when they just keep talking. So they need to become comfortable with a silence and not just fill that dead air. Let the reporter ask the next question. Answer the question and don't say more than that. Now, I have had some people who then are like, yes, no. It's like, no, you can actually say more. And there are all sorts of tips and tricks to really doing media training, how to pivot a question back to what you want it to be and that sort of thing. That takes some time and some dedicated training. It's usually best if you can do that where, once again, put somebody on camera, just film them and let them see themselves. At the same time, don't let them beat themselves up, because inevitably, and I've been doing this for years, I've done 1 million interviews. I still don't like how I sound on camera or anything like that. We are our own worst critics. And your client, someone who's not used to doing this, it can increase their stage fright, for lack of a better term. So they need to understand, trust the media, be comfortable with it, smile. I have people like, no, just smile, be comfortable. Most of the time, it's not a gotcha interview. And if it's a gotcha interview, if there's a potential that something negative is going to come up, that's a completely different line of preparation and making certain that they feel comfortable with that. And it takes practice. It takes rehearsal. And I think too often, because we just think, oh, everybody can take a picture, everybody can jump on video, I don't think we always do ourselves a favor with that mindset. We still need to think about it. I always joke about the Mike Wallace interview. We need to think about that this is a hard-hitting interview and really prepare for it. If you're doing a phone interview, people tend to get more relaxed and they forget that they're not talking to their best friend or they're not. So I've told people to put a mirror in front of themselves so that they know that they're smiling and, don't think about what's not right with your makeup or that you need a haircut or anything like that. But so that you can see yourself, because how you see yourself and that you're interacting with that will change your tone of voice and the level of your friendliness and your engagement. Don't be looking at everything else that's on your desk or trying to multitask, because really your attention has to be focused on that reporter and the questions that they're asking. So you can tell sometimes when you hear a radio interview, like, oh, they really didn't answer that question, or, oh, they pivoted very well. So you can tell when someone has taken the time to prepare.
Preparation is so important in so many aspects of public relations. I wonder if you could tell people to work on one core skill. What would that skill be? Because you just covered a whole bunch of skills in both answers. So if you could pick just one skill for people to pay closer attention to, what would that skill be and why?
One skill for interviews. I think that comes back to concise messaging. Make certain that you understand what you were trying to convey and that all of your answers tie back to that, but that you're not a robot because they're going to throw a curveball question at you. So that's why it's not about memorization. Feel confident and comfortable with the information that you're going to present. Smile and just, be calm. That's the biggest thing. But that preparation and confidence would be from a media relations standpoint. From a public relations standpoint and skill as far as what's going to help you succeed, to me, that is being that voracious media consumer, understanding that landscape, and then how you can turn around and use that for your client. And yet, when we talk about PR, we automatically think we're talking media relations, but PR is communications to any public. So it's internal comms, it's investor comms. I hate that we've gotten so pigeonholed in just media relations. So I'll be talking to a communications professional. Oh, I don't do PR. I shouldn't be part of PRSA. You're a communicator. And now that is also a content creator. That's a social media specialist. And so across all of that, now I may change my answer. If I really had to say bottom line, what you need to be successful in PR, writing skills, that, and people will say, well, but you don't have to really be able to write well for social media. Oh, yes, you do. And it's harder because you have to get your message across in fewer characters, fewer words. Sometimes it is harder to tell a story in 100 words than it is to tell a story in 1,000 words. Writing will always be something that will help you, no matter what niche you are in. If that means that you're writing speeches, you're writing press releases, you're doing social media, you're writing web content, whatever it is, writing. And the way to do that is through practice, because people always ask me about that. And that comes back to storytelling and how you're telling your story. If you can't write and communicate it clearly, then your story's never going to resonate. And unfortunately, a lot of people today don't do a lot of long form writing. And by the way, I can't write in longhand anymore. If I'm not getting to type on a keyboard, then my brainstorming automatically just stops. My creativity ends. But writing is the biggest skill because it is the building block for everything else that you do from a communication standpoint.
Whenever you're looking at how students or people new to the profession get clients, what advice do you have for them as someone who's been successfully practicing public relations with client side and in the organization for so much longer than they have?
Acquiring clients it's a tough magic. I shouldn't say magic. It's a tough skill because depending on if you are part of an agency, you may not be part of that pitch team when you're going after a new client. But every agency approaches it a little differently. For me, I have never been comfortable going to someone and shaking their hand and saying, "Hi, I'm Dawn Robinette, and I want to do your public relations." For me, it's about letting the quality of my work speak for itself. I have had the opportunity to work with some amazing campaigns and efforts, but I didn't get to do that early on. Early on, it was about polish. It was about making certain that I was in the room and I was networking and I was meeting people. Everyone assumes that if you're in our profession, you are automatically an extrovert. Not true. It can be hard to go to a PRSA event or to go to a networking event and to actually meet and introduce yourself. And I think students in particular automatically feel a little self-conscious, like, oh, I don't want to go up to this professional. We don't bite. We are happy to chat with you. I love hearing what a student is interested in and answering those questions. So be engaged. Find people that you'd like to know more about and do some informational interviews, even from a client standpoint. They may have representation that you don't know about, but they also may not have representation. So I have sat down and talked with people, just, tell me more about what you do, and had really engaging conversations where further down the line, I had the opportunity to do some work with them because it just was a conversation that there wasn't any expectation on either side. It just opened a door that's there. And that's where social media is key. Do your homework, though, on who you're looking to talk with or any organization that you want to try to work with. Say, if it's not just about getting a client, if it's about getting a job, if there's a job listing posted, you better know everything about them on social media, everything about them on their website. Dig and find, look at any news coverage, look at everything, because they're going to ask you when you go in for the interview, well, tell us, how did you find out about us? And, what do you like about XYZ? And you better have a good answer. And so it's interesting. And this is not just a challenge for students. I have seen manager level and up not really be able to handle that question. Tell us about, what opportunities do you see? What do you think that we could do better? And they freeze. So you really have to think through, who is it? What do they do? And then what do you bring to the table? What is your unique perspective? And everyone brings something to the table. So have that confidence in yourself, even if you're new to the game. You have gone through school. You've had the opportunity, hopefully, to have a fantastic campaigns class and to pick up learnings in all of that. And so there are times, no lie, I would love to go back and do the whole school thing again, because I think through and I'm like, oh, wonder what they're learning about this now and that sort of thing. You have to be a lifelong learner. It's one of the reasons why I pursued my APR and why I do professional development now, because things change in our industry so fast. I might need to look into seeing if I could audit some of your classes. I know that I'm on the forefront of everything, but I think that confidence, and not braggadocious confidence, like, oh, I can do this better than you all can, but confidence in what you've learned and what you bring to the table, and never underestimate how that comes across. Because if you're going into an interview and you're like this and you have no energy, you really have to work on your personal presence as well, because that changes when you are at an event. It changes even in what we're talking about with this. It's hard for some people to come across well on camera. How do you approach somebody with that nice, firm, but not crushing handshake, and all of those little, tips and tricks when you meet someone? But that to me, that helped when I was earlier in my career, and just be knowing a lot of people, being willing to introduce yourself to a lot of people and make those connections and hopefully grow relationships. In a city like San Antonio, we joke about, we all know each other. It is extremely true. It's why I say them. That's why we all have to be nice to each other, because if not, we'll hear when you weren't nice to someone. But it's truly about growing that network and being engaged with that network. So yes, you came and spoke last fall, I think, to a PRSA luncheon. And so going up and introducing yourself to speakers at a program like that, noting what, asking a follow-up question. What was it that really resonated? And engage with them. And you never know where that opportunity is going to pop up.
And this opportunity came from that opportunities, and you have given us more time than we had planned. Thank you so much for your patience and sharing your wisdom. You spell out your name for our listeners for LinkedIn. I want to make sure people know where to find you.
To find Tale to Tell online, we do have a Facebook page. So it's just Tale to Tell Communications on Facebook. To find me on LinkedIn, it's Dawn Robinette APR. So you can find me there. And I think I'm actually the only Dawn Robinette on LinkedIn. So that makes it a little easier. DAWN and Robinette, ROBINETTE. Thank you, Ryan. It's been a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I'm honored that I had the opportunity to chat with you.